Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 217. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, April the 24th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Well, the trophy wife and I just got back last night from a nice, fun, relaxing vacation in Florida. It was time. The weather in St. Louis, I understand, was awful, at least in the earlier part of the week. But we had sunny and 80 just about every single day. So it was quite lovely for us. So basically, that requires, if you're going to Florida for the most part, that requires getting on an airplane, staying in a hotel, and doing all that non-social distance stuff that we've been not able to do for the past year and a half. So the meat of today's podcast is going to be on that trip, just the getting there and getting back, the pandemic restrictions or lack of pandemic restrictions, and what the area of Sarasota, Florida has to offer. This is a place I've never been before. Neither of us have ever been before. So we're going to talk about that in the main essay of the podcast. But first, a couple things I did want to mention. Number one is podcast news, and not so much news on the James Strong Show podcast, but just podcast news in general. Last week, I did a podcast with Rusty Dell, who's a podcaster as well. And podcasting has become very, very, very popular, especially during the pandemic. Now, I don't know that the pandemic has made podcasting listening any more popular. I think this is just a transition that we're going to. To me, podcasting is the same as radio. It's just not a device, and it's something that's on demand, which with people's schedules being the way that they are, on demand is a whole lot easier than having to tune in between 11 and 1 on a Saturday, for instance. But podcasting has become very, very popular and very monetarily advantageous, should we say, for many people. Not me yet, but that's okay. That's another story for another day. However, the Wall Street Journal had an interesting article in it this week about podcasting, and they talked about podcasting statistics, and they talked about just podcasting and where it's going. Apparently, for many, many years, Apple Podcasts, I think they're some type of an offshoot of iTunes, they were the number one vehicle to listen to podcasts. And because they were number one rated for many, many, many years. Spotify has taken over that trophy. They're number one now. And it has to do with just because they're just doing things a little bit different. I think because they have Joe Rogan exclusively on Spotify and some of the other bigger podcast names on Spotify. If you want to get them, you have to go to Spotify. But what they're looking at doing, Apple, Spotify, and many of the others, they're looking at going to a paid subscription format for podcasts. Now, this is still in its infancy, and the way I understand it is what they're looking at doing is if you're a podcaster and you want to have your podcast available on pay-per-listen, okay, like a pay-per-view, a monetary firewall, then you partner with Apple, Spotify, whoever, and you have to go through their vehicle. You charge your listeners, and they get a piece of the action. Apple's looking at getting 30% the first year, 10% afterwards, okay? Don't know if I like that, but it doesn't matter if I like it or not. That seems to be where podcasting is going. similar to cable TV. For instance, if you're if you like Turner Classic Movies, for instance, you really can't get that unless you're subscribing to some type of online service. So you're paying for it indirectly. And the service, whether it be Spectrum or Dish TV or any of the others, they pay so much money to get Turner Classic Movies. Podcasting is looking at going in a similar direction for those podcasters who want to get on board. Now, the way I understand it is if you want to be a podcaster and still let your show, your intellectual property be on multiple sources at no charge, you can certainly do that. But if you want to monetize, here's another way to do it. I will just tell you, at least for the time being, I have no plans on putting the James Strong Show podcast on any type of pay per listen. Right now, I'm on every format known to man. I'm going to continue to do that for the foreseeable future anyway. But interesting, Spotify has been the one that is now the biggest podcaster, the biggest podcast host. That's where most people go to listen to their podcasts. Not so much my podcast. 40%, actually a little over 40% of all my listeners listen on Apple Podcasts. They're number one. Number two is Spreaker.com. That's my host, and I imagine that's probably via the emails. That's 23%. Spotify for me, 9%. Okay, 9% of the people who listen to the James Strong Show podcast in the last 30 days listened on Spotify. And when you figure, and here's why my podcast is kind of unique, maybe not unique, but maybe unique compared to radio where it's difficult to monetize. Spotify is 9% of all people who listen to the James Strong Show podcast listen on Spotify. 8% listen on JioSaavn, which is a podcasting source in India. So 8% of the people who listen to my show are in India. So how do you monetize that? I mean, you can't really get a ad for the local liquor store here in St. Charles County because probably the people that are within potential customers for that liquor store would be probably 5% of the people who listen to the podcast, if that. How do you persuade someone to put money into it? So monetizing podcasts continues to be a challenge, but it's getting closer and closer to becoming a reality. Okay, so there's your podcast news. And again, I enjoyed having Rusty Dell on the podcast last week. We were talking about equipment, podcasting, etc. It's a good hobby. It's a good thing to do. It's a good art form is what I like to call it. Hobby probably isn't the right word for it. Hobby is something that you enjoy only and really doesn't involve many others. Art form is something that you do that's created. And this is certainly, every James Strong show is a new creation by me for your enjoyment. Also, before I get into the essay today, I want to give you an update on the Jaguar restoration. I am making leaps and bounds of progress, more than I thought that I would. And this is a fairly recent thing, and I think it's because of just all the reading that I've done, the downloading of documents that I've done to learn this car, just being underneath it, on top of it, into it, learning the car, learning how it's put together, how it's made. I'm less hesitant on taking stuff apart because remember, everything that comes off has to go back on, okay? And especially if I'm working on it by myself, if I don't remember where it came off, nobody else is there to say, hey, I remember you took that from here, so put it there. No, it's just me, okay? So if I have help, you get two people thinking about it. But recently it's just been me, so it's just me on my own. But again, as I learn the car, as I find documentation, I'm getting more confident and learning more and doing more, okay? Last week, I did a ton last week. I learned how to take off those those lock knobs, that was done. I took out the windshield wiper assembly. That was all done. I removed not the last of it, some of the brake parts. I did that as well. Some other parts, the last parts, I only have one or two parts in the firewall that have to be taken apart. Lots of other, it's not, I say little stuff, but really it's stuff that has to be done. This week, later today, I plan on taking off the exhaust system, the rest of the brake lines, and the fuel tanks. So I see no reason why I can't do all of those today. Again, because now I have the right tools, a little bit smarter, a lot more confident, more documentation on where this stuff goes. Before I would have to spend an hour drawing a diagram and taking pictures and making notes. Now I've got diagrams as to where it goes from the factory. So a little bit more confident. So my original plan was perhaps by early July, being able to get the car to the my partner in restoring this thing so he can do the engine, transmission, and the sandblasting, the sealing, the primer, etc. Early July. Now I'm looking, this might happen sometime in June. Now I'm making this public, so maybe that is incentive for me to get on the stick. So there's the update on the Jaguar. Okay, little podcast news, little Jaguar news. So now let's go ahead and get into the meat, the essay, the reason for doing the podcast today. And it's getting back into life, getting back into travel. Kind of post-pandemic life for the strong man and for others. A month, 6 weeks, almost 7 weeks ago now, the trophy wife and I got our initial Moderna vaccine stick. 4 weeks later, we got our second stick. And 2 weeks to the day, which is where they say, okay, 2 weeks from the day, from 2 weeks after you get your second stick, you're good to go. On that day, we booked a plane to Sarasota, Florida. 2 days to the day. Never been to Sarasota, but I've heard from a lot of people that it's a wonderful place, a magical place. I've got friends that live down there. Darryl Rowe, who was a friend of the show and actually worked with me on monetizing the James Strong show back in the radio days. He lives down there now, so we went to visit him. We have friends who live in Fort Myers, which is just south of there, so we were able to visit them. And Southwest Airlines now flies to Sarasota, Florida. We considered flying Allegiant Air, which is the bargain airline out of Belleville, which is about, 45 miles from here. But it's a direct flight, whereas Southwest we had to transfer. But with all the baloney you have to go through Allegiant Air, they say $59 fares. Well, the $59 fares were really $159 fares, unless you want to bring on a bag, unless you want to check a bag, unless you want to sit next to your wife. If you want to do all that kind of stuff, the price is about the same. So I don't have priority status with them. I didn't want to wait in the hour-long line to check in. So we just flew Southwest. The price was the same. Sure, we had to connect, but you know what? I'm getting older. I'm a creature of habit. And actually, I'm very loyal to the people that treat me right, which is Southwest Airlines, which is Enterprise Rental Car, which is the Hilton Properties. Because they treat me right, I give them my business. So that's how we got there. St. Louis to Nashville, Nashville to Sarasota. First plane trip in 6 months. Okay, had not been on an airplane in 6 months, hadn't been to an airport in 6 months. We got to the airport fairly early on a Monday morning. It wasn't busy. It wasn't dead. It wasn't crowded. Sure, it was just like a regular, I wouldn't say like a regular Monday morning, because Monday morning is usually pretty busy at the airport. This was not as busy as a Monday morning. This was busy like a normal Tuesday morning, okay? So busy but not packed. And really the only difference was that everybody had to wear a mask. That's it. Yeah, they say something about social distancing, so when you're standing in line, you're not next to the person next to you, you're kind of spread out. They had protection for the TSA guys and gals, of course. But for the most part, it was business as usual.